So with that, we'll transition here and we'll move to Dr. Burrows, who's doing the faculty development update this morning on learner professionalism. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Dr. Simonson. Let me get this pulled up. I promised today, since I have given some of these before on things like adult learning theory, which was probably dry and boring, that this will be very practical. Dr. Gallahan actually asked for this to be delivered to try to give some background to all the faculty as to what's been happening in the College of Medicine and some of the things that we've been experiencing, so that you guys can be eyes and ears and well-informed about the processes that happen in the background. So I'm going to start, because this has been said in a few different educational sessions, but I want to bring a citation to it. If you want to laugh and cry at the same time, this Journal of Graduate Medical Education article is one to read. And it talks about Generation Z, or the I generation, that are really our predominant medical students, remembering that this is a stereotype, and so we need to take this lightly. But in general, this is a group that grew up with ubiquitous social media and internet access, and there are lots of published citations for how this generation views things. But one that stood out to me a lot is that they are, quote, less prepared for adulthood. And then from an education standpoint, something that we see that really relates to professionalism is that they really want to do things that they only feel are purposeful for their long-term learning. So they want customization, each one of them individually. They very much want in-the-moment learning, which I'll bring up as a storytelling towards the end of this as to how that directly has happened to us. And many of them see coursework as impractical, meaning they don't necessarily want to learn what we think they need to learn. They just want to learn what they think they need to learn. And Dr. Gallahan and I have seen an uptick, as well as the College of Medicine, why we're talking about this, in professionalism concerns. And it's not just us at UNMC. So I'm going to read this quote. This came from a large academic institution through our listserv, and I think highlights all of the things that we are seeing. And so this clerkship director said, lately have had students with professionalism concerns. Examples include missing mandatory sessions, with the excuse being they thought these sessions just weren't worth their time, contradicting the attending on rounds with patients, late requests for time off to travel, i.e. non-urgent reasons, as well as unexcused absences if those were denied, difficulty accepting constructive feedback, arguing about grades, and this went on. And the replies to this were quite fascinating, because Dr. Gallahan and I have had many discussions about the increased frequency, and the listserv blew up with many clerkship directors saying, man, we've really had the same thing. And I've been doing this for 10 years. In this last couple of years, maybe pandemic related, maybe generational, probably multifactorial, we've had lots of issues, way more than we've ever had in the past. And why does this matter? So I'm going to tie us back to professional identity formation, and then take us into what the College of Medicine is doing. So this was published a long time ago. This would be Generation X, if you were to think about them as a generation of learners. But this study was done at 3 sites, and they looked at medical school behavior, citations or disciplinary action in medical school, and then they looked to see how that impacted board citation, right? So in practice outcomes. And this study group published many papers on this, but this is probably the seminal one that we can talk about. And what I want to show you is just 2 things to drive home what the College of Medicine has done. Is this looks at those disciplined physicians. So this is board discipline compared to controls from their same medical school with as similar of specialty backgrounds as they could get. And they looked at unprofessional behavior in medical school, and they categorized it. There's a whole, this table is an entire page. So I just cut out the top for demonstration purposes. But what they found is that if people have 1 or 2 episodes of any of these domains, they don't necessarily have a significant risk of being cited by a medical board. But if they have 3 or more, there is a significant risk that these students are going to go on to have issues as a practicing physician with professionalism. And so the College of Medicine has taken this and converted this into a policy. And we have some domains so that we can pay attention to this, not just in our clerkship, but across the students' continuum, so that if they have multiple episodes, we are working with them to help and to avoid this long-term kind of high-level issue that could happen. So the domains you guys can see there, they revolve around kind of summarizing what those publications have shown, and especially honing in on the ones that have statistical significance in long-term board citation. And at least for this, I'm going to try to give this some broad strokes for the last two slides, but for medical students, our professionalism fail criteria in kind of phase 2, very specifically, as well as a little bit in phase 3, would be if they have 3 episodes of unprofessional behavior, and we'll talk a little bit more about how to differentiate that, or 1 egregious issue. We fortunately have not had an egregious issue. We've not had someone yell and scream at someone, do something that just absolutely required them to fail. But we have had multiple times where we've needed to talk to students about repetitive, smaller professionalism issues. And so you may be thinking, well, what does this have to do with me, or what can I do? And I think we can all role model professional behavior. That's a no-brainer. And if you notice something, I think giving some in-the-moment feedback can be very helpful. I will tell you that my experience with this is if you bring up the word, I'm concerned about professionalism, or I feel like that may have been unprofessional, students perk up more so than any other type of feedback I have ever given. I think they understand the gravity of that. And so a student that shows up late to your clinic once, obviously may have a very valid reason, a car breakdown, so on and so forth. But this would be maybe in that same scenario, the student that shows up late and you ask them about it and they acknowledge that they need to be there at a certain time, and then they show up late again, maybe 2 more times that week. That would fall into some of this unprofessional behavior, and giving them some feedback in the moment would be very helpful. The thing that we need and the College of Medicine needs is just for someone to report it. And we have come to many of the divisions to talk about this and made this request. Dr. Gallahan and I, or Dr. Naybauer, Dr. Goodrich, and Dr. Bloom in the phase 3 group, 4th year, don't need a lot of your time. We just need the basics, and then we will meet with the student. It allows us to be a third party, right, in a kind of objective way. And also we have time to sit down with the student and really dive into the weeds of what's going on. If you're uncomfortable with all of this, you can report this anonymously. UNMC and Children's both have professionalism reporting options. Either one of those are fine. UNMC technically has one specifically for reporting student professionalism concerns, but no matter how you report it, it would get back to us and we can handle it. So what will we do, and what will the College of Medicine do? So I will tell you, almost universally, when these happen, it ends up being a very formative experience for the student. So our goal is not to get them in trouble. Our goal is to try to catch them early. So if this happens on week 3 of an 8-week clerkship, that we are able to get the info from you, meet with them, and put out the fire before they reach the fail criteria or before they have a more egregious issue. What I find, and I'll tell you some stories about, is that many of these relate back to the generation of students. So one very recent one was a student who kept taking their phone out on rounds, and the resident gave them feedback and they kept doing it. And at one point they were standing directly next to a family at a door looking at their phone in the middle of rounds. And this student, when I talked to them, actually thought they weren't doing anything wrong because they were looking up answers to questions they had in the moment. And they really were a generation of learner who just pulls out a device and finds the answer right away in the moment. And it took some coaching to help them understand how that might be interpreted by others and how that might not be the most appropriate setting. Other issues that have happened is we had a student who was really disengaged and not able to attend many things and was quite late to several activities. And it appeared to be just complete disinterest. And on the backside, after meeting with them and spending time, the student had some very major family tragedy and struggling quite a bit. And so our professionalism feedback was much more about understanding our internal limits and our internal kind of discourse, and how we may need to raise a white flag and say, I need to take a break at this point. So much of what we do is not to get them in trouble. It is to help them move along so that ultimately we can benefit the patients and our teams, as well as benefit the students. The last part of this, and why it's really important for us to know about it, in addition to your excellent feedback, is that we will fill out a form to report it to the College of Medicine. And this gets back to that article. A student that is doing this once every clerkship and in the past would have gotten by and maybe never been identified by the College of Medicine, we want to identify them. And this is where the rubber meets the road a little bit more formally for us. We've had a student that really was not responsive to feedback and was quite defensive and arrogant, and that was not unique to our clerkship. And so that is something that was addressed above us, beyond what we did in the clerkship. And so the reports that came through from a resident physician for that one were very meaningful, and I hope will help that student during their long-term practice, so that they don't end up with a board citation or with challenges that impact patient care. If you guys are interested, there's another citation here about the limited knowledge we have around remediating these concerns. There is a lot of work that needs to happen to build on what was published almost 2 decades ago, but it's there, and it's something that we could use everyone's help with, as well as the College of Medicine, to keep students professional and to keep our care in the community and the region moving forward. I will make sure, I know there's not really time for questions, I'll make sure that the citations go out with this. They're all listed at the bottom, but I'll try to include all the PDFs in case people are interested in reading more. Thank you, guys.